Hello, my name is Garchompro, and I've been Challenger since Set 2. Double Trouble is one of my favorite augments in TFT because it enables you to play boards that you otherwise wouldn't be playing, due to the fact that it fundamentally changes the way you're piecing together your board, because you have a lot of value in playing two of the same unit. Double Trouble is pretty flexible, there's a lot of different boards you can play with it, but a lot of them are unknown. So in this video, what I'll be going through is my top 5 Double Trouble compositions. These are the boards I'm looking to play if I get a Double Trouble augment. Before I begin talking about the Double Trouble compositions, I'd like to talk about a couple things about Double Trouble and how to play around it correctly. Double Trouble, of course, gives armor, magic resist, attack damage, and ability power if you're fielding exactly 2 of the same unit. This means that if you have 3 of the unit, you're not going to be getting the bonus. Just make sure you only have 2 of the unit on the field. In addition, we want to be using a carry typically that is going to be enjoying multiple of those stats. For instance, Azir really only cares about AP out of those 4 stats, making him not a great Double Trouble candidate. Conversely, Yasuo really enjoys the AD, armor, and magic resist because he's going to be taking a lot of damage, so he is a solid Double Trouble candidate. In addition, the value of items shifts a bit when you have Double Trouble. You're not going to value flat stats quite as much, so stuff like Deathblade, Deathcap, and Stoneplate is going to be a bit worse. They're still fine to build with Double Trouble though, but they are a bit weaker than they would be generally. And stuff such as Giant Slayer, Infinity Edge is going to go up because it multiplies off your damage. And then stuff like Warmogs is going to be a bit better as a tank item because it's scaling a stat that you're not building into. Same thing with attack speed items like Rapid Fire Cannon and Ginsu's. They're building into a stat that you weren't already building. One other note about Double Trouble is that Trickster's Glass actually has very good synergy with Double Trouble. Of course, Trickster's Glass gives you a duplicate of your unit, and this duplicate unit actually does count towards Double Trouble. So for instance, if I have Trickster's Glass on this Callista right here, getting a duplicate Callista, this would be giving me the Double Trouble. So make sure you don't put in an additional Callista because you would lose the Double Trouble value this way. Finally, the augments 2 Healthy and 3's a Crowd work really well with Double Trouble. This is first due to the fact that they're going to be scaling different stats. Double Trouble is giving you AD, AP, Armor, and MR, and then 2 Healthy and 3's a Crowd are giving you HP, which is completely different. And also, they're going to count for each individual unit. So for instance, if I play 2 Taliyahs because I have Double Trouble, it'll count towards 2 Healthy twice, meaning you're going to be getting 222 HP, making it very strong synergy. As one final note before we begin, I did record this video on the final day of 13.13c. That being said, all these compositions should still be strong in 13.14. There were a couple changes to a couple of the boards, but I talked about those changes in the video, so if you hear me say in the next patch, I'm talking about 13.14. The next comp I'd like to talk about is going to be Double Trouble Viego Reroll. Now the idea of this composition is that Viego is going to benefit a lot from Double Trouble because he doesn't necessarily need to go deep on his traits, so you can sacrifice a couple slots on your build. And then he also really enjoys the armor, magic resist, and AP, and the AD is also not completely wasted on him either. What you're going to want to do is roll on level 4 and level 5 until you have Viego 3, and then you're going to start pushing levels. While you're going for Viego 3, you can go for Maokai 3 as well, but if you don't hit Maokai 3, it's not a big deal. I would just start pushing levels as soon as I hit the Viego 3. In terms of itemization, you're going to put whatever tank items you have on Maokai, and then importantly, we're going to be itemizing Viego as the primary carry. You want to make sure that you have a healing plus 2 on him. The best healing item in my opinion is Hand of Justice, but Bloodthirster and Gunblade are also good as well. The best plus 1 in my opinion is going to be Titans. This is just due to the fact that Viego is really going to enjoy the armor and magic resist that Titans gives. He'll be in the backline taking a lot of damage, so he wants to be able to have those extra resistances. In terms of the final item, Jewel Gauntlet is probably my favorite for this build because it synergizes well with Hand of Justice giving the crit chance. That being said, there's a bunch of other options you can go. Something like Double Titans is really good. A Giant Slayer or Guard Breaker is going to be acceptable, although not great because Viego is usually going to be going on the backline, so you would rather just have raw damage. Deathcap is another great option as well for him. Your itemization from Maokai doesn't matter that much, just throw whatever tank items you have on him. Stuff like Bramble, Warmogs, Dragon's Claw, Stoneplate, Sunfire, Redemption, and Vow are all good on him. This is typically going to be your level 5 board, and then when you get to level 6, you're going to want to be throwing in a Bastion, so something like a Kassadin is going to be what you're looking for, just to buff up your front line like so. One note about the early game is that I do enjoy having my Viego in the second row like so. This is due to the fact that early game fights are a bit slower, so having your Viego not take damage at the start of fight allows him a bit of time to ramp up and start doing a bunch of damage. That being said, in the late game, I do enjoy having Viego on the front row. That way you can proc the rogue as soon as possible and just try and snipe down the enemy carry. At level 7, what you're going to want to do is get rid of the Kassadin and throw in 4 Shadow Isles, so this will typically just be Gwen and Callista, and play a board like so, 4 Shadow Isles to buff up your Viego as much as possible. At this point, you can also potentially run either double Callista or double Gwen instead of the second Maokai. Typically, once you start pushing levels, your final board will look something like this. You're typically going to be itemizing either Gwen or Callista as a secondary carry. If you can go for Callista 3, itemizing Callista is fantastic. Rageblade is going to be your best item in this composition because we're lacking a lot of attack speed. We don't really have any challenger. If you get Callista 3, you can potentially drop the Gwen for a challenger unit, so something like a Yasuo or a Kai'Sa here, just that way you have the challenger for the Callista. Otherwise, Rageblade can pick up a lot of the slack. Plus 2 items for Callista. Jewel Gauntlet is really good, Giant Slayer is really good, Guardbreaker is really good, Hand of Justice and Gunblade are also really good as well. Rapid Fire Cannon is another option for your Callista here because she's going to be lacking a bit of attack speed, so perfectly fine there. If you're not caring that much about itemizing your Callista as like a primary carry, Shiv is another good option to buff up the damage of your Gwen and your Viego. She's going to be the best Shiv holder in this build. I don't really enjoy going for like flat AP on my Callista. Stuff like Deathcap Archangels I don't think is as good as this like mixed AP AD. Something like Infinity Edge is also good on her as well. Typically what I'll do though is I will dual carry the Gwen. Gwen is actually a fantastic double trouble unit. I almost made a composition today talking about just double trouble Gwen. That being said, it's a little inconsistent because you really have to get 4 Gwens in order for the comp to be good, which is a little late in the game, so it's a little situational. That being said, you don't even have to go for Viego Reroll with Gwen. You could also just play like a 4 Shadow Isles Gwen board and go like that. In terms of Gwen itemization, you want to have healing +2 on her. Jewel Gauntlet and Spark are going to be great. You can also throw the Spark on the Viego as well. Both of them are great holders of Spark. Deathcap is another great item for her. Titans is another great one. I don't love Edge of Night in this build just due to the fact that you have 4 Shadow Isles, although in non-4 Shadow Isles builds, I do like Edge of Night on Gwen. Gunblade and Bloodthirster are also completely acceptable options instead of the Hand of Justice. If you're going for Gwen 2 and you have a Gwen 2 with 3 items, you can also drop this Callista here simply just for a Slayer unit. This is typically going to be Aatrox. And you can play a board like this at level 8 if you don't have items on the Callista, and this can be completely acceptable. 3 Slayer for Gwen, just allowing her to do a bit more damage. That being said, if you do have items on the Callista, I think double Callista is better. And of course, if you don't have items on the Callista, you can simply just drop the Callista for a Senna, just to buff up your team a bunch. The next comp I have is going to be Double Trouble Akshan. Now, Double Trouble Akshan is interesting due to the fact that Akshan doesn't actually benefit that much from Double Trouble. He really only likes the AD from it. That being said, in practice, this is really powerful due to the fact that you're able to run 2 Akshans, putting them on opposite corners, sniping down both corners of the enemy's team, killing their carry no matter where it is. So in practice, it ends up being very good. In terms of the board right here, what you're going to want to do is go level 7 and roll for the board that I am showing. You're going to be running the 2 Akshans as your 2 carries, along with Nasus, Renekton to fill out the 3 Shreema, and then just Sejuani, Lysandra, and Ashe to fill out 3 Freljord because 3 Freljord is really, really powerful. In terms of itemization, you're going to want to itemize both Akshans, that way they can both snipe down a corner. Akshan needs to have either Deathblade or Infinity Edge, or else he's just not going to be doing enough damage. Then for the final itemization, Runons is currently his best one. That being said, that may change next patch as they are nerfing the interaction with his ultimate. Giant Slayer, Guardbreaker are also great options, and I think Hand of Justice and Rageblade are acceptable as well. After you itemize your Akshans, you're going to want to make sure that you have some tank items. Typically, you'll want to put them on either Nasus or Sejuani. Nasus, I think, is a bit better, but if you hit Sejuani 2 first, feel free to just throw whatever tank items you have on her, and it'll be fine. One interesting thing with this composition is whether to give the Shreema buff to your Akshan or your Nasus, because starting next patch, you'll have a lot more freedom over that. It'll just be whichever one you put in last will be getting the Shreema buff. Personally, I actually really like it on Nasus because I enjoy getting the Shreema buff on my frontliner just to make it really tanky. That being said, Akshan is your primary carry, so you may want to Shreema buff him, but personally, I do prefer it slightly more on the Nasus. If you have AP items, they're going to be going on Lysandra, and if you can manage to 3 Slayer Lysandra, she's going to be really good and is a great secondary carry for this composition and enable you to cap it out. If you end up going for Lysandra 3, at level 8, you can simply just throw in a second Lysandra for double trouble value. If you don't go for Lysandra 3, what you can simply just do is throw in another Nasus for more double trouble value, like so, or you could even throw in a Shen in that spot as well, just for more frontline. Another variation you can go for is actually playing Urgot on this board. If you have Urgot items, Urgot is going to be great here because he actually enjoys the double trouble quite a lot. You typically won't be playing 4 Deadeye if you have the Urgot, you'll just play the 3 Deadeye like so. He really likes to have healing and Titans like so. And he's going to benefit a lot from double trouble because he enjoys the armor, magic resist, AP, and the AD because his spell scales off of his AP, and his damage of course scales off of his AD, and he enjoys the armor MR because he jumps into the enemy team. If you're running in Urgot 2 with items, I highly recommend putting in another Urgot for the double trouble. You can actually just drop out of the Shreema here, dropping the Renekton, and just playing double Urgot like so. And this is a completely other viable option for this board at level 8 if you have the Urgot items like shown. And finally, just make sure that you have your Akshans in opposite corners, that way they both snipe down different sides of the enemy board. One other thing I've seen people talk about is that if you have an Akshan with exactly 1 bow in it, his ult will line up perfectly with the Freljord, and I've seen people say things like that you shouldn't be putting stuff like a Hand of Justice or another bow item on your Akshan because then he'll ult before the Freljord. It is nice to have his ultimate proc at the same time as the Freljord, but it's not necessary. He's still going to do a bunch of damage before the Freljord procs, so it is fine to throw an extra bow item on your Akshan. You don't need to be proccing at the same time as the Freljord. You're ulting earlier anyways, which has value in and of itself, so I wouldn't worry too much about that interaction. The next comp I have is going to be Double Trouble Soraka plus Kassadin. This is a bit of an underrated composition right now, but it's actually quite strong, and it'll be even better next patch after buffs to multiple of the units. The idea of this board right here is we're going to be using Kassadin as the frontliner. He's obviously going to enjoy the armor and MR, and will actually enjoy the AP as well because it scales up his shield. And then Soraka will be our backline carry. We'll have 2 Sorakas, that way they can heal a bunch and do a solid amount of damage. At level 6, what you're going to want to do is play a board like so, going for Soraka 3 and Kassadin 3. After you hit those 2, you can start pushing levels. We're running Taric and Galio here just to fill out the synergies. In terms of itemization, you want to make sure that you have a Shojin on your Soraka to make sure that she casts as much as possible. Then you want to have either a Death Cap or an Archangel's because it's going to scale up not only her damage, but her healing, because her healing is going to scale off of AP. Whereas something like a Giant Slayer, the damage amp from a Giant Slayer will only be buffing her damage. That being said, as her third item, it's completely fine to go for like a more raw damage source. So something like a Giant Slayer or a Guard Breaker or a Jewel Gauntlet is going to be completely acceptable as your third item. Kassadin is going to want to be taking your AP items. He's going to be your Spark Holder. That being said, if you have Shiv, you can just throw it on your second Soraka. And then Kassadin's just going to enjoy whatever other tank items you have. Warmogs, Bramble, Dragon's Claw, Redemption, Vow are all great on him. Stoneplate as well. Although Stoneplate is a little lower value because you're typically going to be playing into Bastions and have the Double Trouble, so he already has a lot of armor and MR, so he does enjoy the other tank items that give him other benefits a bit more. Once you get Kassadin 3, Soraka 3, you're going to start pushing levels, and this is going to be the general board you're going to play. You're just simply going to be putting in Shen and then another Bastion unit, ideally Cassante right here, and then you can throw in Aphelios for the 3 Targon, buffing up your Kassadin's shielding and your Soraka's healing as much as possible, and just making the board really, really tanky. You can put spare AD items on your Aphelios. He really likes Rageblade plus Deathblade. And then you can throw spare tank items on either your Shen or your Cassante. One other note is that while you're rolling at level 6, you can also potentially go for a Galio 3 and have him as a supplemental frontliner, maybe with some spare tank items. If you're doing this, you can throw in another Galio like so, and instead go for some sort of 4 Invoker board where you're running a Shen instead of the Taric at the final level, and then you throw in another Invoker, ideally the Rise. So this is another acceptable variation as well. One other note for the board I showed earlier is that if the Rise is good enough, so Shurima is going to be solid, and then Ionia and Freljord are going to be the main ones you're looking for, you're going to want to run Rise on this board here to get the value out of him. In this place, you'll typically just drop the Cassante, dropping out of 4 Bastion, and then you can also drop the Aphelios for another Invoker unit. So typically just something like a Karma, giving 4 Invoker, that way your units are casting as much as possible, and you're actually getting the value out of the powerful Rise ability. One other note for the board I showed earlier is that when you're going level 9, putting in Ascena is really good, because if you're running 3 Targon, then she's going to scale really well off of that, buffing up her shield. The next comp I'd like to talk about is going to be Double Trouble Challengers. Now this comp is really good because multiple of the units are really going to enjoy Double Trouble. Kalista enjoys both the AD and the AP. He also enjoys the AD, Armor, and Magic Resist. If you end up Double Troubling the Shen, he enjoys the Armor, Magic Resist, and the AP. And Kai'Sa enjoys the AP as well as the Armor and Magic Resist because she ends up jumping around a lot of the time and sometimes will take damage when she's doing that. First and foremost, I have Kalista here. I really like playing around Kalista with this, just due to the fact that she's the easiest to hit, so it's going to be a bit more consistent. And if you can get to Kalista 3, it's going to be really strong. One thing I've seen is a lot of confusion around playing 2 Kalistas on your board. 2 Kalistas works pretty well together because they're essentially going to calculate the damage of each other's spears and pull out whenever the combined damage of the spears would kill. What's going to happen is both Kalistas will pull, meaning that you're actually going to do double damage from what's expected. That being said, due to the fact that their pull is going to be true damage, this isn't actually more damage than you would just get normally, because the first one's going to kill. This really only works in your benefit if they have something like a Bloodthirster shield that wasn't accounted for, and then you need the second one to pull the spears to kill through the shield. But generally speaking, 2 Kalistas isn't going to have some like crazy OP interaction, but they do work well together. In terms of Kalista itemization, you typically want to go for mixed damage items. So something like a Jewel Gauntlet buffs up both your damage and your AP because it gives you AP as well as spell crit, but then also gives you crit chance, so it buffs up her AD a bit. Giant Slayer and Guard Breaker are other great options as well. She likes healing, Hand of Justice, and Gunblade are going to be good. And then Rageblade is another solid option for her. That being said, in a more vertical challenger build, don't love Rageblade. Titans is actually quite good on Kalista too. That being said, in like a 4 challenger build, Titans is a little more because she's going to stack it a bit more slowly. If you're playing like a 6 challenger board, Titans is one of her best items. You're going to be throwing whatever tank items you have on your Shen. Of course, you can opt to drop either the second Yasuo or the second Kaisa for double Shen if you have a bunch of items on Shen and just want to buff him up with the double trouble. In terms of Yasuo itemization, he really likes to have Edge of Night. Rapid Fire Cannon is also really good because it enables him to get to the enemy backline. One thing to note is that if you have enemies in the corners on the enemy's backline, like so, if you put Yasuo in this hex right here, he'll ult the back right Cassio if he has a Rapid Fire Cannon, and if you put him in this hex right here, he'll ult the back left Cassio. So keep that in mind. One thing I like to do is have my Yasuo next to my Shen. That way my Shen is tanking for my Yasuo, and the Yasuo doesn't get targeted, because what'll happen is you'll have enemies on the right side. They'll be targeting the Shen, and once the Shen dies, they start targeting your Yasuo. So you just want to have Shen your tankiest unit, stall as long as possible until they start attacking the Yasuo. In terms of Kaisa itemization, she wants Shojin +2. The +2 can be Jewel Gauntlet, Guardbreaker, Death Cap, Archangels, Gunblade, Hand of Justice, Giant Slayer are all good. Whenever you're playing this board, you're going to want to roll down a level 7 to stabilize. At level 7, just drop either the second Yasuo or the second Kaisa. And then when you go to level 8, you'll play a board like so. Again, you can play double Shen instead of one of these. One other note is that Challenger +1 is going to be really good on this board. If you have Challenger +1, you're simply just going to be putting in Warwick instead of either the second Yasuo or the second Kaisa, and have a board like so. This will be really powerful. And as my final and best double trouble composition, to the surprise of nobody, I have double trouble Taliyah. This comp has been really powerful in the meta and has been the go-to if you hit double trouble. It's just really strong due to the fact that both Taliyahs are going to knock up targets and throw boulders at the targets that each of them knocks up. Then when you're running double set, each set knocks up a target and the Taliyahs will throw boulders at that. So you just end up having a ton of damage coming out. At level 6, you're going to roll for the board shown right here, going for Taliyah 3 and Set 3. You can also potentially go for Swain 3 if you'd like to. I think Teemo 3 is usually a waste of money on this board, however. And then once you start pushing levels, you have a few options. You can put in 4 Multicaster with Sona and Vel'Koz, but often what's preferred is just to throw in Sion and Cassante, because these units will knock up a bunch of units, allowing your Taliyahs to do a lot more damage. Another good unit to throw in at higher levels is going to be Jarvan, due to the fact that he just gives you a bit more frontline, a bit of CC, and the bonus strategist giving more AP to your backline and more shield to your frontline is going to be good as well. So something like this at level 8 is generally going to be your standard board with the double Sion, double set, but if you don't hit the double Sion, you can run Cassante or Jarvan or for Multicaster. In terms of itemization, you're going to want to prioritize Taliyah items. Taliyah has a bunch of items she wants. She's not that particular with what she has. Deathcap, Jewel Gauntlet, Shojin, Gunblade, Blue Buff, Guardbreaker are all going to be good on her. Second, Taliyah can actually take items as well. You'll have a Taliyah 2 here. She can take those additional AP items. Having both itemized is completely fine. Set will take your tank items. You really want to have a Spark to maximize the amount of damage. Vow is also really good because it's going to allow your set to ult after one auto, just giving out a bunch of damage at the start of the fight. I really like to put my set in front of the tank that I want to kill. So if my enemy has like a Jarvan that I want to kill at the start of the fight, I'll put my set in front of that. If he has a Vow, he's going to ult before the Jarvan, and your Taliyahs will just kill off that Jarvan before it even has a chance to ult. Set can just also take whatever spare AP items you have, whether it be like a Redemption, Warmogs, Bramble, Stoneplate, or a Dragon's Claw. And yeah, this is just going to be the best double trouble comp currently. That being said, everything else I did talk about in this video is very much playable, especially if you're contested, and you won't always have a good line for this Taliyah. If you don't hit the units, this board does suck, so it is good to keep all other options open, even if this is the best one currently. If you made it to the end, I want to thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed the content, make sure to subscribe. As a final note, I didn't talk about the best legend for any of these compositions. That's due to the fact that the best legend for all of them is going to be Poro, simply due to the fact that Poro is going to give you the highest odds of hitting double trouble.